We're going to go over some 3D tools that are have been recently introduced into After Effects, as in they've been kind of updated and have been designed for easier use compared to what After Effects had before. So on the version that I'm on, which is the 2021 version, we now have these 3 tools up here, which are grayed out because we don't have anything. And I'm going to be talking about these 3 tools and just how 3D layers work in After Effects. So let's create a composition. I'm going to make a composition out of my Adobe Illustrator file, which is available in the resource pack. All you have to do is just import it over here. So I have these 2 files. I'm going to grab both and import them as footage. There we are. Now, because these 2 are different files, this is an AI file, which means that it has layers within, and this is just a regular flat image. I'm going to first bring in the image and explain how the 3D would work with a regular image. Just import this one, and I'm going to make a new composition for this 3D. If I bring this in here and maybe rescale it like this, you can see that I'm still not able to use these 3 tools. In order to use those tools, you need to activate and change this layer into a 3D layer. To do that, all you have to do is just turn on this icon. Down here, there's 3. Just go into one that looks like a Rubik's Cube. Turn it on. Now you saw the, you can see this colorful thing. It's called a gizmo, and it's used for navigation and movement around 3D layers. So now that I turned this on, you can see I can now use these 3 tools. Now let's go into the first one. This is called the orbit around cursor. Basically, you can see it orbits, your image is orbiting around the point where you held your cursor. So if I hold it here, you can see that it rotates based on where I put my cursor, and it's just turning around that point. This is different from the regular rotation tool. We're doing it in a 3D space. Let me turn off this layer, the 3D icon. If I go in like the rotation brush, this is all I can do with a flat layer. Can't do much with it. I cannot flip it like we just did. So in order to use it like that, you would have to turn this on. Let's go back here and use these guys. So as you can see, I'm just rotating and flipping this image along my cursor. And we also have some other tools. This is the pan under, so it's just used for moving your thing around, your image, or the layer. Then we have the dolly tool, which is just, it's kind of like scaling inwards and outward. But once you combine all of these things together on a camera layer, it's going to be a really cool 3D animation. We'll get into that soon. And let me talk more about the gizmo that you see here, the colorful thingy. If you get your selection tool or hit V on your keyboard, let me zoom in. You can see that if I go on this guy, there's a Z. So if I turn the Z around, you can see that I'm rotating it. And there's other things too. We have the X, moving it along the X axis. Bring it back. We have the Y axis, up and down. And then we also have rotating along the X axis. And the first one was the Z axis, this guy. Then we also have the same thing for the Y axis. So again, once you combine all of these guys together and create keyframes, it's going to be a really cool animation. Let me undo all that I did. I'll just turn off this layer. delete the image and just bring it back in to reset everything. And I'm going to resize my image so that we can do like a simple pan motion with our 2D image. All right, so I'm going to turn it on again, and I'm going to open the properties. Once you open the properties, there's not much difference. We still have the transform tab. We just have some extra options for orientation and some rotations. And you can see instead of the regular rotation that we had before this was a 3D layer, we now have the X, Y, and Z rotations. So instead of one rotation, we have 3, and we also have this orientation. And because there's a stopwatch next to them, that means that we can animate this. So I'm going to turn on the stopwatch and maybe move in a few frames. Then I'm going to add a number. That's a bit too much. Let's go for like 2 and 1 and 3. I'm just adding some random numbers so we can get some sort of movement. So if I play this back, you hit F9 on this. Let it render. You can see that it kind of rotates, but it's rotating around 3 points at the same time. So it's a bit different from the regular rotation that we have. And now we will start with this guy. Let's do like an X rotation. It's the first point, coming a few frames. And I'm going to maybe make it go down a little. Oops, that's too much. Let's go for 10. 30 maybe. That comes out of frame. It's fine. And then let's go back to Y rotation. So this will go upwards. And with the Y rotation, we can make it go in another direction. We can make it go on the left or right. Let's put it like to the towards the left. Finally, we have the Z rotation. Turn on the stopwatch, come in a few frames, and we can make it rotate along the Z axis. It's too much. Let's make it really slight movement. And then I'm gonna F9 all of these keyframes. And while I'm at it, I'm just gonna make this smaller. This will not affect the keyframes that we add. I just want to see the movement clearly. So hit the spacebar and you can see we're having this cool 3D motion effect. Play it back. That we created using some simple keyframes. You play that so it zooms out. As in loops. And you saw that we had this simple flat image, a regular JPEG, and we're able to kind of turn it 3D by using these animations and by turning it into a 3D layer. Now, when this is just a flat image, you can see it's not that much of a wow factor. It's just moving around, and we added some rotations and all that. But in order to make a really cool animation, you would need a camera layer. And for the camera layer, I'm going to use the AI project that we had. I'm going to delete the composition too. So in the same resource pack, we have this AI project, which is this orange guy, imported as a composition, retain layer sizes, and import. And now this is your composition. Double tap on the composition. We have this really nice landscape, vector landscape. And it's a little blurry because we set this to 1/4. Remember to do this if you want things to not lag during your project. Before we continue, I just wanted to mention something about the layering when it comes to an Illustrator file. Currently, I have 2 projects to better show you guys how the layering works. And I'm going to import the layered one as a composition, retain layer sizes, hit import. And I double click on my composition. You can see I have all of my layers. Now this is only happening because I have separated the layers in my Adobe Illustrator program. And what happens when I don't separate the layers, let me delete this guy and bring in the one where everything is within one group. Again, retain layer sizes, import, double click. You can see I only have 2 layers. And basically this whole thing is going to be moving around in one as one. And that's not what we wanted, because we wanted every mountain and every little detail to be its own layer, so we can create that cool camera thing that we're trying to make in this lesson. So I'm going to go in Illustrator for a second, because when you download things from online, these programs, you need to kind of adjust the layers in order for you to create not just a 3D effect, but to just work around with these vectors in general. You need to separate the layers. And I'm quickly going to show you what that means in Adobe Illustrator, just in case you plan on downloading projects from the internet, and so that you don't run into this problem. So this is what you would usually get when you download things from the internet. I got this from Freepik, and as you can see, they're in one group, and I can only see the separate layers when I expand this group. Now this will not work in After Effects. As you saw, it will only come in as a single layer and everything will be merged. Therefore, we cannot animate each of these layers together. And if you're using a Photoshop project, you won't have this problem, because Photoshop by default, every layer is a separate one unless you purposely put it in a group. Now this is what you want. You want each of the layers of your project to be separate and not within a group. And like we saw when we imported this project, we had each of these separate layers, and that allows for a really fun and easier way to animate your layers. Right, and if you want to see how to put them in singular layers, if you don't know how to work with Illustrator, I'm going to delete this guy. All you have to do is just create another layer on top, and then from the last to the top, you go in the opposite direction. Just drag the last layer and then keep doing this with each of the things until you get all of the layers in separately, like this guy. Now let's go back in After Effects. Alright, I'm back in After Effects. I brought in the layered version of the project. Double click on your composition to bring out all of these layers. And as you can see, each of them are separate. Let me go on one of the mountains. And that way I can animate each one to my liking. Alright, so if I do want to create like a motion with this animation, like we're going to zoom in towards the sun through the mountains, I need to create what is known as a camera layer. To do that, just go on your top layer, layer, new, and then we have a camera one here. You're gonna get this guy. So essentially, we are animating what the people will see. We're basically animating through the camera lens, which is why it's called a camera layer. I'm gonna go with a one node camera, hit OK. So we got an error because currently all of our layers are in 2D. So I need to turn all of my layers into 3D with that icon like we talked about. Let me go on this guy and then turn on the 3D layer for every single thing. Alright, so now the camera layer, you actually create that again. So it's best to do this beforehand. To layer new camera. Now you can see I didn't get that error. Alright, so in the camera layer, if you open up the properties, we have the camera options, which is just like, the aperture. Basically any option you would have with a real camera, which is really cool. I'm going to go into transform as well. We have some similar things that we know, like we did in the 2D image. Alright, so I'm going to start with here, transform. We can change the position of the thing. And remember, in the camera layer, we are editing what the camera is seeing. So that includes every single thing below it. So don't be shocked as to why I'm moving the entire project. That's the whole purpose of the camera layer. If you turn on the keyframes, you can animate normally. You can go along the x-axis. You can see I'm kind of zooming in. Hit F9 on both of these guys. Hit OK. You can see we're like zooming in. Delete that. Let's go to the next one. We have the orientation, which we already went over it, but let's review it. So based on these three axes, you get to kind of rotate your layer. Oops, it's going out of frame. And yes, these are just some basic movements that you can have with your camera. Now, when you want to create those really cartoonish animations with a layer like this, you would have to really spend time on it and understand the movements that animations have. Alright, so let's see what we can do to make that really cool animation effect. I'm going to open up the camera options. You can add the aperture and focus distance. I'm going to leave those be for now. I'm just going to move in towards the sun. I'm going to cut my composition short, open up kind of expand the timeline. And in here along the, oops. I'm going to move it to, I guess we won't move it to the side, just go inwards. And because I want it to be slow, I'm going to add space in between the two keyframes. Let's play that back. Alright, so in the first keyframe, we're already quite zoomed in. So let me expand my work. The first keyframe needs to be on 0. I need to bring my position back. Let me hit reset to bring everything back, and then I'll go in the position. And now it's working a lot better. I'm just going to expand and put space between the two keyframes so it's like a really slow zooming in effect. It's still a little too fast. Let's just increase it to like 6 seconds. So we're really slowly moving in towards the sun. And I'm going to go down in my layers. I don't know what layer this is. Okay, this is layer 16. Open it up. Then transform, go in the beginning. And so essentially what I need to do here is to create the dimension between each of these layers, meaning that, let me close my camera layer first, and layer 16. That means that the layer that is closest to us, which is the layer 16, and the layers behind it in order need to be kind of, we need to create a dimension between all of them. Meaning that this guy that in the way back needs to be further away from us, and this guy needs to be right in front of us. And to create that space that will eventually create that parallax effect that we want, we need to create something that's called a null object, and then use that guy to just create that effect. So what we need to do is to go to, I'm going to delete this camera layer first, make a new one. Go to camera, and instead of 1 node, make sure it's on 2 node. can name it if you want. I'm just going to hit OK. All right, now that I have this, I also need to create a null object. So go to Layer, New, Null Object. Place this on top. Let's name this guy Mountains. So every effect that we want to do, every movement that is related to that parallax effect is going to take place within that null object. So we're not going to be directly animating each of these one by one, because if we did that, it would just be a regular 2D animation. So instead, go to Mountains, the null layer that you have. Then we're going to parent this to Camera. So what that means is that we're going to go in the Mountains layer or your null layer, open this and set it to Camera 1, which is our camera layer. Now that we did this, we are going to, although before I do that, I need to first turn my null object into 3D as well. And now I'm going to do that. Right. The null object is now connected to the camera layer. And we're also going to come down here to the 1 view and turn it to 2 view. And you can see we have this weird space. Zoom out all the way. And you can see, we hit Etch and bring this guy down. So this is essentially where the camera is. So the start of our lens is here. And it's moving away onto our composition, which is here. Let's come back and we're going to set our null position. Hit V. So hit P on the mountains or your thing, and then change this to 0. So now the null object is at the same location as the camera lens. It's maybe a little confusing when we're starting out, but try to follow along, and in the further tutorials it will be a lot easier to work with. So what we did right now was to turn the position numbers, all of them need to be 0. So basically that means that the null object is going to be at the same level as the start of our camera lens. So now after we've done this, we're going to unparent this guy. So go on this guy and then hit None. So now it's no longer connected to the camera. Now we are going to turn every layer, including the camera, and make the null layer the parent of all of these, which means go on like the camera layer, go on this, turn it to Mountains. And we're going to do this all with all of the layers. Going on the first layer, come down, Shift, and grab all of the other layers. I forgot the background. And before I continue, because this is a heavy project, I need to save my project. So Control S. Just make sure you save it, because there may be a chance that your program crashes because you're working with 3D layers and they're usually pretty heavy. Setting this guy to quarter is going to help, but you never know if After Effects crashes. Alright, so I selected all of these layers and I'm going to grab this guy, or just open this. Just grab this guy and place it on top of Mountains. You can either use the spiral shape or the drop-down menu, whichever you're comfortable with. So now every single layer, including our camera, is set to Mountains, which is our null layer. You can see all of them are like that. Once we've done that, we're going to just click away, and we are going to get to the closest layer that's towards us. And I'm trying to click away. You can see my composition is already laggy. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to find the layer that's closest to me, closest to the camera. Click on this and I'll find out that that's layer 16. So we're going to unparent this layer, set it to none. And then we're going to go on the Mountains layer, hit S to bring the scale. Let me zoom out on our second view. And we're just going to scale this guy out. Zoom out, hit etch. So essentially what just happened is that we moved this layer further away from us. So if I set this to 0 again, let's go to 0. We have to parent it first. So I'm going to parent this back to mountains. Let me undo what I just did. Just created a big error. Alright, so I'm not going to do that. Before it was here, and now because we scaled it, we moved it further away from the lens. And we need to do this for every single layer and kind of move them in order of the way they appear and move them further away so we have that parallax effect. So after layer 16, we set it to none, and then we came in the null object, hit scale to kind of move it further, bring it upwards. Then we're going to go in the next layer, which I believe is layer 14. Let me check layer 15. So it's actually layer 15. I'll go on that. Again, unparent. Go in scale, and then just move this guy further. So you can see this was the first layer, this is the second one. And we're just creating these spaces between the camera and ourselves. So because these are numbered, it's easy for me to guess what comes next. Let me see what layer 17 is. Okay, so layer 17 may sound like it's the closest layer to us, but it's actually the furthest. It's the sun. So I'm going to go on layer 14 and just keep doing this until you're finished with all the layers. Now what we're doing here is not affecting the preview of our illustration. It's kind of doing some backstage work. So basically what we did previously, so let's not do that. Thought I did something with the scaling for the camera. Didn't do anything. And then the next layer, which is layer 13, let's check to see if it's right. And it is. Again, unparent, scale the mountains or the null layer back to create the space between each of these layers. And then we're going to go to layer 12. Let me turn off the visibility, see what that is. All right. So right layer, unparent, go up. Let me actually extend my timeline so we can see what's going on. Hit edge to move this camera guy a little closer so we can see. Unparent, scale out the null layer. Layer 11, let's check what that is. So this is just the shadow of the highlight of one of the mountains. It's fine, just do it in order. It would be helpful if you could put the shadows and the highlights in, kind of merge them together so we don't have to work with this many layers. But I'm just going to proceed and we'll see what happens. Layer 9, again, it's just a shadow. And I'm actually going to delete the shadows and all. Maybe that could work easier. Alright, so I'm just going to do what I just did for every single layer, including the background. So make sure you don't leave anything behind. That goes from the first layer to the last, but make sure you do it in order. So this guy would be first, and then it would go according to distance. And then the last layer would be your background layer. I'm going to do this to every single layer, and then I'll be back so we can continue with the parallax effect. Alright, so I did that with every single layer. You can see they're all set to none. And the scaling just went up from where we left it. And I'm going to hit etch and show you guys what we did exactly. Let me come down here because we're zoomed out completely. So basically what we did was that we had a basket, which was our null object, and we stood somewhere around here. We're zoomed out as much as we can. I can't really show it to you guys, but if you remember the tip of our camera lens, so that was the basket. And as we walked forward, we dropped each of our layers. Think of them as like pebbles. And as we're walking forward towards the finish line, we're dropping each of these pebbles at a determined distance. So each of these guys are actually the layers, and we're creating this space between them. And this is what creates that 3D space that we talked about. So that's essentially what we did. It wasn't that complicated. It may take a little bit of practice to kind of master it. And once we're done with all of the layers, just go back here, turn it to one view. We were on 2 view, now we only want this guy, the regular view that you have. And now if I move my mountains, we can't really use the scale because we used it to determine the space. So on our null object, hit P to get the position. If I choose to move to either side, and I'm going to move up and down to show you guys the effect, you can see the space we created between each of the layers, and that is what's creating that 3D effect. Hit Control Z, but we said we wanted to kind of zoom in towards the sun. So in order to do that, I'm just going to change this to fit. Turn on the position keyframe, move in maybe like, we said 6 seconds because we wanted it to move really slowly. And on the Z axis, we're going to move forward as much as we want. Go in more. You can see the space that's between each of the layers, and we created that using the null object. Select both keyframes, F9, go backwards. And I'm going to let it render so you guys can see. And now we can see that we're slowly moving towards the sun, but these guys are moving out of frame because we created that space, and it's creating this really cool 3D effect that we could use for like maybe an introduction to your animation, or just with regular layers. You could also do this with images as long as each of the images have their own particular layer and you follow this tutorial step by step. And I'm gonna stop this. So we created this cool effect. I'm gonna close my null object, lock it, and then turn off the visibility. So now if I play this back, we just have the regular movement. Turn off the camera too, because it's connected to the null object. And you can see we have this weird placement now. I'm gonna move back. I just want to show you guys these 3 tools that we have up here. And I'm just going to use these brushes. And if you wanted to use any brushes to move around your layers, you can still use this like we did in the first. With the first image, you can see the space we created between each of the layers. And that's really cool. This is what's causing that really nice animation. So essentially our camera lens was here. And when we added the scale, we created these little spaces between each of the layers. And finally, when we used position and moved it up along the Z axis, we kind of moved in slowly. And naturally, the stuff that were closer to us is going to fade away as we walk past them. So that's what we did with just a few layer positioning. We have the pan under cursor. If I move this, you can see I'm moving up and down. So if you want to examine your layers or create animations using this, you can use these 3 guys. They're only available for 3D layers, so make sure that the 3D icon is turned on for your layers in order for them to work properly. Hit Control Z. And then we have the, I believe it was called the dolly. Yeah, we have the dolly effect, the dolly tool, which allows us to zoom in towards the center of our composition, which is also the center of our landscape image. So that's how these 3 things work. They're associated with 3D layers. And now I'm gonna turn these 2 back on. using those guys and null objects and all that, we created this really nice animation. And in the future lessons, we'll see how we can take these type of animations a step further and make really cool projects. I'm gonna hit the stopwatch. And if you wanted to end the animation here, you would come at the end. I'll have to unlock my mountains layer first. Select everything. Go on the first layer, Shift, then click on the last layer. Control-Shift-D, which is a lot of layers to process. And then on the second one, just delete them. They're naturally selected. And now I have cropped all of those layers. Let me come back up. And maybe if I wanted to fade out, I'll add a solid layer below. So Control-Y or Command-Y, change it to black. If I wanted to fade to black, add that on. Bring that below everything. So below all of our Adobe Illustrator files. And I'm going to actually add, I'm going to cut this up a little bit. Control-Shift-D. Just need a tiny bit for the beginning of my project. Grab all of these layers. Just grab them here. And then move in maybe like from the point where I want my black solid to fade away. It's getting a little laggy. We have a lot going on. It's only natural. Make sure you hit Control-S once in a while. I forgot to do that. And my project might disappear, but we're done with it. It's not that big of a deal. Okay, it's saving. So make sure you hit Control-S once in a while in your project so you don't lose it. And then you would have to start all over again, which isn't fun. And okay, I moved them a few frames back, almost like 2 seconds in. I'm going to drag my cutoff black solid and then move it on top. Actually, I have to do it here. Move that on top of all my other layers. Oops. On the top. Go above the null object. And then I'm going to move this guy can stay. So after my animation's over, move in a few frames, and they fade away. I'm going to select all of my layers and then hit T. So we have the opacity for all of them. And an easier way to do this is just export the video and then add this effect. It's just going to save you some time. And trying to turn on the opacity. Okay, so we turned on the opacity at 100% for all of these layers. It keeps lagging for some reason. All right, and then I'm going to come in like at the end of my project and then turn the opacity. Here would be 100% and then here it would be 0 because it fades away. And then we're going to leave the black solid underneath. So once these guys fade away, it fades to black. And in the beginning, we're going to do the same thing, but for this layer. So here, this guy is going to be 100%. Hit T on the black solid, 100%, and then it fades here, 0%. F9. And I'm going to grab all of these keyframes. There's a lot of them. And also hit F9 on this. Right, there we are. And I'm going to go back, let it render. There's a lot to take in for After Effects. And then I can see the final product that I have. All right, it rendered. Now we can see it's black, it fades away, and we're just having our regular 3D animation, and then the animation fades away. So you have to work with the order. You can spend time and make it perfect. I'm just going to leave it here. So that is how the 3D tools work, and basically just anything 3D. The whole logic of 3D is in the dimensions that you need to create between your layers, and also using the camera layer, which we had down here, to create these this really cool effect with your illustrations or just images, anything you want. I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. I will see you guys in the next one.